Well, the arena of marketing, like many others, has seen quite a few shifts in the last few years for a variety of different reasons. There are the expectations of consumers, as well as the impact of artificial intelligence and many others. Pleasure to be joined here in studio by Dominic Gallello, who is Managing Director and Head of Digital for Bridgepoint. He is also the former Chief Marketing Officer at Bumble Group. Nice to meet you, Dominic. Thanks for a few moments.
Thanks for having me.
I mentioned those couple of areas, but realistically, you also have to throw in the pandemic. And it just feels like it was a time where, for a lot of different sectors, marketing included, that we have seen just a lot of pressure and angst and even change that's kind of come about recently. How do you view kind of the state of marketing?
I think we're on the long trajectory of a great transformation in marketing, which is really putting the power much more in the customer's seat in terms of how they look at and assess different brands. So while brands historically were able to control the narratives around what they wanted to be known for, famous for, the advent of the pandemic put more control in terms of users consuming content online, discussing different brands online, and that means overall you have more brands that are having to take control of their message by really reflecting internally, not externally, in terms of how they define who they are, how they deliver that value to customers, and how they keep their values consistent in everything that they do. So it is a huge period of transformation at the moment.
Do you even distinguish between marketing in general, but also digital and online only marketing as how these changes are taking place?
Brand expectations from customers are constantly evolving and accelerating. So certainly how they want to transact with you, how they want to discover your products or services, those are following the places that the customers are really hanging out, which is the internet sphere. And more importantly, many of the more emergent social platforms like TikTok and Instagram, for instance, where a lot of brands actually still don't have mature and sophisticated strategies, not just for how they communicate and market, but also how they transact with those customers. So thinking about how companies can really evolve to be where customers are, where they're spending time, and more importantly, where those customers are having conversations around their category or around their brand is a very critical need. But it's been slow for brands to really transform how they go to market. Brands are really accustomed to traditional marketing campaigns and agencies that create these one-way push messages versus thinking about how do you inspire a community to participate in your brand? How do you give them the tools to create content on your behalf? And the brands that are really succeeding in the social sphere are those that are being community-led versus being a one-way funnel of messaging that no one really cares about.
So just off of something you said a moment ago, when you have companies that have kind of followed pattern A for such a long period of time in terms of their marketing, but the expectation of the consumer has now become pattern B.
Oh, yes.
It's a make or break for a lot of companies in terms of something like brand loyalty, where if you're not doing enough to meet the expectation of the consumer is going to head off to another product.
Absolutely. And some companies are playing catch up in this sphere. If I think about the beauty space, for instance, Estee Lauder, for instance, shifted a majority of their marketing away from really traditional media-driven marketing in towards more influencer marketing. Has that been successful to stymie their decline? Not necessarily. There's a lot of ongoing effort of transformation in that business. But I think you do have to think not only about how you're communicating with customers, but also how are you driving value for your customers and how you create your product or service. Customers care more than ever about the values of a company. How do they treat their employees? How do they treat their suppliers? How do they provide transparency around their environmental impact or many other types of impacts they may have on society? And so it's not just about how do you communicate the bells and whistles of what you do. It's about that end-to-end customer journey as well as the end-to-end value creation that you do as a business. That's where brand is really having to play a part. And that's where marketers are being stretched away from just thinking about what's the latest campaign, the latest message, to how do I partner with my procurement team or my finance team or my operations team in terms of how do we uphold the values of the company that are the reason people choose us, the reason people stay with us overall into the customer experience.
In terms of the connection with the consumer, and I'll use your former life at Bumble as the example here, in the world or the space of dating apps.
Yes.
Where you're trying to make that social connection to begin with, what are the challenges that are out there right now for those companies?
So if you think about many dating apps, they historically relied in some ways around the great visibility that digital channels provided in terms of the ability to target, ability to build lookalike models, ability to do quite a lot of sophisticated types of marketing to drive high quality customers into a network. But the reality of how dating apps grow is not outside in, it is inside out. It is about how many high quality good chats can you create in your ecosystem. And that requires strong ecosystem balance. And so how do you then ensure that you're able to deliver a strong ecosystem, a healthy ecosystem? That requires a lot of hand-to-hand combat, what I call, which is a lot of community building. It's about going into neighborhoods. It's about meeting with people, understanding where they exist, and then driving the right partnerships with ambassadors, with events, or with anything else to really drive that ecosystem. There's really not a lot of scale in that type of model when you first are doing that type of intervention, but the net effect of you driving a healthier ecosystem means more good chats, more dates, more people talking about, Becky or Daniel, who they met on that dating app, and actually, therefore, more top of funnel coming into the dating app. And so the companies that are able to do the hard growth strategy, which is brand building, community building, and building a strong ecosystem, are more successful than the lazy marketers who are using digital tools as a crutch to shortcut their way to success.
So that's I guess, the unique dichotomy that you're talking about here, because when you're talking about building all those different components, the chats, the dates, et cetera, you're relying on the component of the consumer themselves to factor into that level of success.
The community is in many ways the most important channel, right? Why are you paying for media impressions on a channel that no one's paying attention to, when as a dating app, you've got millions of people who are really affixed to your platform and really engaged, not only on a functional basis, but also emotionally with your brand. Those are the people you want to become your ambassadors. And really the notion for any company, the implication for any company, is that brand and marketing is not so much about pouring the funnel from the outside. It's about how do you nurture and educate your own customers to be advocates on your behalf. That's really where scale and unlock comes from. And that was certainly a recipe for success for Bumble.
So now here we are in 2024, and we're getting into the time of artificial intelligence. And we know that seemingly it feels like every sector is being impacted by AI in some fashion, one way or the other. How is it impacting marketing already, and where do you see it going in the future?
So for the world of marketing, and particularly for brands, of course, a lot of the costs towards doing marketing are significantly reduced. The ability to generate huge amounts of content that are really required to communicate with customers in a very personalized way, there's a lot of opportunity there. But I think we shouldn't forget that the fundamentals of brand building, which is about a clear and cogent idea that customers resonate with, that is imbued throughout your customer experience, is still required. And my concern is that a lot of the conversation around this AI as a tool is shortcutting many of the hard things that brands need to do to really effectively win, regardless of whether or not we're in the AI age. Of course, we're capitalizing on a lot of those opportunities, particularly within the Bridgepoint portfolio, in terms of how we're leveraging these technologies, but it doesn't undercut the need for strong strategy, strong foundations to succeed.
And that's seemingly one of the questions I think that a lot of people are asking, because a lot of people assume that as AI has kind of come into the mix and will come into the mix even further, that it's going to take over for a lot of that decision process. But the human component and kind of the theorizing is still, in your mind, it's going to remain as important as anything as we move forward.
I think humans will play less of a producer role, more of an editorial role in many scenarios. And the reality from a marketing standpoint in many ways is, how do you ensure the best resonance with that customer? Well, that insight needs to be generated in many ways from a human. Of course, you can collect that data through many other tools like artificial intelligence provides, but creativity still sits at the heart of how people connect with brands. And that's not something you can necessarily fully test and automate your way to. It does require that human empathy and understanding that is still required. Now, that ability to augment that insight and put it into production, huge opportunity. But I wouldn't totally rule out the role and importance of humans in really driving that connection between a brand and its customer as being very critical.
And so a platform, as successful as it may be, with its online component is just as good as the people that are working behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you still need an agile team that can evolve with probably the changing talent and organizational requirements in an AI-driven age. Of course, better cost structure, the more efficient you can be. But nonetheless, what is going to make you successful is not necessarily can you produce content more effectively. It's going to be, can you really deliver a brand that people proactively choose, that they're willing to recommend to other adjacent audiences that are like the customer you want to pursue.
Do companies, though, do they still have to be a little bit worried? Maybe worried is not the right word, but have to be aware of the component of what AI can bring from a cost savings perspective in regards to that overall bottom line growth that the company's looking for?
Absolutely.
When you're talking about, you don't want to overdo it relying on the AI, and still you want to be able to make the best profit that you can.
So we as Bridgepoint invest in across a number of different sectors, and across those sectors we've done a lot of work to understand whether or not a company is potentially at some disintermediation risk, which means market demand falls because AI can do the job of the company and some part of its value. Second is it changes the competitive dynamics of an industry. You think about software where you can ship more productively than ever before. The market demand may remain, but actually the way you deliver that value becomes more competitively intense, or you just have some pure operational leverage. And so we're really focused across those three different categories in terms of what is the stance you should therefore take. And within the disruption potential category, where there may be a potential impact of disintermediation by AI, we're actually recommending those companies become AI first companies in many ways. They have an incumbency advantage of some specialism that has existed within the business for some years. They probably have some proprietary data. It's up to them to leverage and accelerate that incumbency advantage with these very democratic tools, with these AI-driven tools to better service the customer. And so it's really a period of transformation for many businesses, particularly on the more impacted end. And so what we're looking for with our management teams is the ability to experiment, a willingness to not only exploit these technologies within their existing business model, but also to explore new potential business models within the safety of their existing model. So there's a lot of change certainly happening at the moment. It touches all functions.
Are there components then of that learning and that building out moving forward that also to a degree tie back into what we went through with the pandemic? And I ask that because I've asked a lot of CEOs this in the last 3 years about, are there elements of your operation that you changed because you had to, because of the pandemic, that ended up being better for you overall, longer term? Is it the same in some cases with marketing?
I think there's going to be consistent transformation of the marketing organization. You should see and expect a significant bias towards more creativity-driven talent versus production-driven talent. And those that are historically in a production-level role, through the ability to manipulate content through human input, will be able to actually better drive, in many ways, the consistency and quality of output that a brand requires of its content much more. So I think the roles of teams are going to advance very, very rapidly. We see that within the agency businesses in particular. If you think about how all the holding companies have communicated their organizational transformation plans, they're investing in these underlying technologies that their strategists in particular are going to be able to leverage. And I think we'll see that transformation happen. But, it is still many ways early days. Most companies are still crawling, not even walking. And so over the coming years, I think this transformation will play out in more of a gradual pace in some ways than the very hard disruption that the pandemic imposed on a lot of businesses.
So is that the next level of innovation that we're going to see play out in marketing?
I think what you should expect is greater personalization of brands, certainly. But will it be sort of transformational by comparison to many of the fundamentals that I think are still important? I don't think so. I think you'll see an explosion of content, but what ultimately wins is really high quality content. And that requires a human sense that AI isn't necessarily able to immediately deliver, certainly today.
Let me finish up on this because we've also talked a lot about brand on this show. And it seems like companies now are more focused on their brand than ever before because of the concern of loss of consumer, brand loyalty loss, everything kind of in this conversation that we've had over here the last 15 minutes? Is it the same way for you that you see companies more focused on it than ever before?
As much as I'm a marketer is really sort of dating, brand is the marriage.
That's right.
And
That's right.
it's very important that a brand really considers and a company really considers what is its core proposition, how does that proposition enable them to grow as a business, not only in what they do today, but what they could do tomorrow. So it's an innovation map in many ways. Right. While secondly, driving alignment of the customer experience. And you'd be shocked how many businesses don't speak the same way, don't behave the same way across different functions of the organization or different products that customers touch. And so I think this radical transformation of power away from the brand into the customer means that the brands stand naked in the eyes of their customer. And you've got to make sure you are buttoned up in terms of how you behave, how you operate, how you treat your employees, how you treat your suppliers, and ultimately how you treat your customers. That's going to go that much farther because customers will then recommend you to other people versus you trying to leverage ineffective television or digital media channels to shout your way to success. That's just not an effective recipe for success anymore.
Dominic, great to meet you. Thanks very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Dominic Gallello, who is Managing Director, Head of Digital at Bridgepoint.